Morning. Hope you're having a nice weekend, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers. It's a major election year in America and here in Kentucky. In the Bluegrass, first-term Republican Congressman Andy Barr is facing re-election for the first time on November 4th. Barr is actively and aggressively working hard to convince voters to send him back to Washington. His Democratic challenger is Elizabeth Jensen, who appeared on this program a couple of weeks ago. Jensen has primarily emphasized economic issues, including a federal increase in the minimum wage and a law that would require equal pay for men and women performing the same job. Jensen also attacked Barr's use of government mailings because she says they were more promotional than informational. Barr won his seat in 2012 by defeating four-term Congressman Ben Chandler. In this campaign, he has talked mainly about the economy as well, but also about health care, veterans, and how he's reached out to constituents while serving in office. The 6th District centered on Lexington, but also includes growing cities like Richmond, Nicholasville, Georgetown, and Winchester, as well as the state capital of Frankfort and a lot of rolling hills and farms and other towns in the area. Congressman Barr, welcome. Thank you for coming. We appreciate it.
Great to be back with you, Bill.
At this point in the campaign, all of a sudden the nation's attention is switched to some international issues going on and national security in the wake of this terrorism threat from ISIS and other groups. How concerned are you about that? What role does Congress need to play in the national strategy?
Well, very concerned. This is a national security imperative that we meet the threat of ISIS or ISIL, the Islamic State. This is a very serious threat to our homeland. It's a threat to our allies. In many respects, this terrorist army is more dangerous than bin Laden's al-Qaeda in August of 2001. They're more numerous. They occupy more territory throughout northeast Syria and also into northern Iraq. They control major cities like Mosul. They overran Fallujah earlier this year easily. They are well armed. They've taken over the second largest supply point in northern Iraq. They're well funded. Their revenues are projected at anywhere between $3 and $6 million a day. Not only did they overrun the banks in Mosul, but they have access to oil revenues. Some of the recent airstrikes you've seen have targeted some of the modular oil refineries that ISIL is using. A lot of that revenue is coming in from Turkey or from the Assad regime. So you've got a serious threat. Thousands of these terrorist fighters have access to Western passports that do not require a visa to enter the United States. So this really truly is a clear and present danger to the United States and our allies and to the national security of our country. Unfortunately, this was a preventable threat. President Obama did not just end the war in Iraq, he abandoned the war in Iraq, and against the advice, against the wisdom of many of the military leadership in the Pentagon, our diplomatic corps, people like Ambassador Ryan Crocker, Ambassador James Jeffrey, who was President Obama's first ambassador to Iraq. All of them said you need a residual security force left in place after the withdrawal in December of 2011. President Obama ignored that advice, and the result is the rise of a terrorist threat that's even more dangerous than al-Qaeda.
However we got here, this is now. Congressman Senator McConnell has been supportive of the president's strategy so far in assisting Syrian rebels who stand against ISIS and doing these airstrikes ongoing. Do you agree with that strategy so far?
I did vote for the president's narrow request, the train and equip piece, which was put on the floor of the House of Representatives a couple weeks ago, right before we left town. I supported the president because the president did on national television. He finally acknowledged the growing threat of ISIL. I think he outlined the objective clearly, which is to degrade and defeat ISIL. I agree with that objective. I remain concerned that the train and equip strategy is insufficient. In fact, when we received our briefings from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and many in the State Department and the Pentagon, members of Congress received those briefings. What was emphasized was that this may be a necessary piece of the strategy to achieve the objective, but not sufficient. Those were the words of the president's own chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So in response to that, I did support the train and equip request, but I also joined a couple of my colleagues, Chris Stewart from Utah and Marlon Stutzman from Indiana, and we wrote a letter to the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Buck McKeon, and the vice chairman and the incoming chairman, Mac Thornberry, and we requested that the House of Representatives do our job in terms of robust oversight, that we bring in some of the military commanders, the retired military brass who are veterans of the Iraq campaign, and have them give us, tell the American people what is at stake, what is truly going to be required to prevail, to achieve victory with honor, and what is going to be required to give our men and women in uniform the safest, most and best chance of success in Iraq. Generals like Mattis, Petraeus, Stan McChrystal, these are the experts that we need to rely on.
Well, House Speaker John Boehner seems to be calling for U.S. troops on the ground, or saying that we need to have all options out there at this point. Are you there?
Well, one thing that General Mattis has said is that you don't telegraph to your enemy what you won't do. You don't take options off the table, and I am distressed that our commander-in-chief is telegraphing once again to our enemy what he will not do. And that doesn't embolden our allies either. You know, part of the solution here is a robust international coalition that includes not only Western allies like the United Kingdom and France, but also moderate Sunni states, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and others. And that's important to build that coalition so that this is not a Christian versus Islam or Western versus Middle Eastern conflict, that people recognize that this is a robust international coalition. What doesn't give our allies in the region a whole lot of confidence when we take options off the table prematurely. So, yes, I supported the train and equip piece. But I think we need to conduct this oversight so that we get the advice we need as a Congress, what is going to be required to carry out this campaign with victory.
Is there a scenario, Congressman, where Congress might urge the president to do more?
Well, yes, absolutely. What we don't want to do is put our men and women in uniform who are in the air at threat because we don't have sufficient ground strength. Obviously, this does need to be an international coalition, but the president has said it himself. He's come late to this conclusion, but he's right that ISIL, ISIS, Islamic State, whatever you want to call it, does present a grave threat to our national security. If that is the case, and we're going to send our men and women into harm's way, let's give them the tools they need to achieve victory. And we need to hear from the experts, the veterans of Fallujah, of Anbar, who will tell us what is required. And I will tell you, I have a lot of constituents, young men and women, who have returned from the theater of battle. Some of them who are suffering from their own injuries, the invisible wounds of war in some cases, and many who lost their brothers over there in places like Anbar. And there was a lot of sacrifice, both in terms of blood and treasure. And it is a shame that we didn't do what was required to secure the victory, to secure the peace, like we did after World War II in Japan and Germany, like we did in Korea. So, you know, a lot of feedback I'm getting from constituent veterans is do what is required to honor the sacrifice that we made.
You brought up veterans. Let me go ahead and go down that path. A lot of problems have been revealed about the Veterans Administration, and some who've served our country have died while awaiting care. And I know that many in your district have come to your office and told of their stories. Do you see improvements after all the attention and light has been brought to this issue?
Well, a real crisis. The nationwide audit after the Phoenix VA scandal revealed that 57,000 veterans were on a waiting list for 90 days or more without a single first appointment. 64,000 additional veterans couldn't even get on a waiting list. And then you had 13% of all VA schedulers who were told by their superiors to falsify waiting times to make it appear like the waiting times weren't as long as they actually were. Fortunately, the audit of the Lexington, Leestown, and Cooper Drive VAs came out much better. And that's a good thing. We still are advocating on behalf of our veterans to make sure that they get the care they need when they need it. But I was pleased to support multiple versions of VA reform that ultimately ended up in a bipartisan, bicameral package that was signed into law by the president. And many of the reforms that I fought for were included in that final package, including a provision that would say that if you're a veteran and you've requested care and you're on a waiting list for 30 days or more, you don't have to wait any longer. You will be issued a VA choice card, and you can go to a non-VA provider, a private provider of your choice, so that you can get the care you need on an urgent basis.
When people have come to your office with problems, veterans have come to your, contacted you, what does your office then do?
Well, first of all, we get them in touch with one of our caseworkers. We have two wonderful, wonderful people who work in our office who are dedicated public servants who have a relationship with the Veterans Administration. I have another Iraq and Afghanistan Marine veteran who also interfaces with our local VA, and we intercede on their part. We advocate for them to make sure that they're getting the care that they need. Sometimes we can't get the result that they want in every case, but we certainly commit to every veteran who comes in the door. We will give it everything we've got to make sure that they get the care that they need.
Let's switch to the economy right now. There are signs that the United States economy is improving. Certainly, if you look at the market, you see some confidence growing. And here in Kentucky, we had a drop in unemployment in all 120 counties for the first time. Do you think the recession is over?
The recession actually officially ended in June of 2009, a few months into the first term of President Obama's administration. The problem that we've seen over the last 5.5 years is that the recovery has been anemic. It has been the worst, slowest recovery since the end of the Great Depression. The economy is moving at half speed. You saw the last jobs report for August was that there were 85,000 fewer jobs created than expected. If this was a typical average post-war recovery, we would see gross domestic product growth twice the rate as what it is today. If this was a recovery that looked like the Reagan recovery in the 1980s, our economy would be growing 3 times as fast as what it is now. So the problem is not that we're still in recession. Technically, we're out of recession, but the economy is moving at half speed. There are some signs of some growth, particularly in business investment right now. But if you talk to the average Kentuckian in my district, they will tell you that it doesn't feel like recovery. It feels like a recession still for them because too many people are living paycheck to paycheck. I think a recent statistic was 3 out of 4 Americans are still living paycheck to paycheck. And the median household income in this country has declined over $2,000 over the last several years under this Obama economy.
All right, I want to discuss with you several aspects of the economy and some more issues. We'll be back with U.S. Congressman Andy Barr, Republican of the 6th District, on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers in just a moment.
Give us 5 minutes to make your life easier. MomsEveryday.com.
Direct from Broadway to the Opera House stage, Broadway Live invites you to come play with 5 fun shows. Elf the Musical, Guys and Dolls, Peter and the Starcatcher, The Great Gatsby, and Sister Act. Tickets to all shows are on sale now.
I'm Mitch McConnell, and I approve this message.
Would you serve for 4 years if you win?
Yes, I hope that's the term, yes.
Sound familiar?
I will serve out my full 6-year term.
But Obama and Grimes both broke their promises in order to campaign for higher office. Each had little experience, then stopped showing up for work. And worse, Grimes still takes her taxpayer-funded salary, while her parking space at the state capitol sits empty, day after day.
Keep up with the latest news anytime, everywhere with the WKYT News app.
Welcome back now to Kentucky Newsmakers on WKYT. Certainly glad you're with us today, and we're glad to be joined by Congressman Andy Barr, a Republican of the 6th District here in Kentucky. He's running for re-election. You're adjusting to Washington okay, and then the back and forth and raising the family at the same time?
Well, yes, and it's obviously challenging from a time standpoint, but this is actually a great time because here heading into the home stretch of the campaign, I get to be home with my family and my constituents, so it's a good time.
We were talking about the economy. You know, economists in this country say that our middle class is really shrinking or it is disappearing, that we are becoming more haves and have-nots, or upper class and lower class economically. Does government have a role in getting at that?
Well, you may have seen on some of these television ads, one of the questions raised is whether or not the government creates jobs. And my view is that the government certainly doesn't create private sector jobs, but the government can create an environment in which the private sector creates jobs. The problem with our economy now, the problem with income inequality, the problem with folks in Kentucky struggling to make ends meet, when I talk to my constituents, is that the government is getting in the way. It's a outdated, complex, burdensome tax code. It's massive over-regulation of our economy, $1.8 trillion in cost to our economy. It's the Dodd-Frank law, which is hampering access to credit for entrepreneurs and small business owners. It's Obamacare, which is reducing hours for workers. All of this government intervention is actually slowing down what would be otherwise a normal economic recovery.
Let me ask you about the bank deregulation, and you have a spot that's been running on that. But the laws were made tougher after what happened in 2008. What do you want to see loosened up?
Well, what we need is the right kind of regulation. The problem with Dodd-Frank is it didn't solve the problem. It didn't address the actually underlying cause of the financial crisis, which was subprime mortgages fueled by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and bad government policy. Instead, what Dodd-Frank does in large part is impose an avalanche of red tape and crushing regulations on small community banks and credit unions here in central Kentucky and around this country, and they had nothing to do with the financial crisis. That's the tragedy. 398 new rules and regulations, over half of them have been implemented, imposing $20 billion in costs annually to the economy, 60 million paperwork burden hours, 3 times the amount of paperwork burden hours that was required to build the Panama Canal. Think about that. Just to comply with the Dodd-Frank law, it takes 3 times the number of people than it did to build the Panama Canal. And are we safer? Is the system safer? No. In fact, arguably, we're even more vulnerable to a meltdown now than we were before the Dodd-Frank law, because the law has put so many small community banks and regional banks out of business. It's encouraged consolidation in the banking sector. And so we've concentrated more risk, in the large systemically risky institutions. The Wall Street banks have gotten bigger, and fewer of our small community financial institutions have had to go out of business. So less competition, less choices for consumers.
You've indicated you do not support a federal increase in the minimum wage. Should that be left up to the states or localities, as even now being considered in Kentucky and Jefferson County, where they're looking at having their own potentially a hike in the minimum wage? Or do you think that in any case that raising that floor will take away jobs?
Well, it would certainly make more sense on a local basis where the cost of living varies. Obviously, the cost of living in Berea, Kentucky is different than the cost of living, say, in Connecticut or New York or Los Angeles, for example. But on the whole, it's distressing to hear politicians say that their jobs plan is to raise the minimum wage, which the Congressional Budget Office says would immediately eliminate 500,000 to 1 million jobs. We're thinking too small in this country right now. We need to be focused not on minimum wages, but maximum wages. We need to be focused on looking at the minimum wage jobs as stepping stones, as training jobs, as skill building jobs, and jobs where people learn the value of hard work. And then we need to focus on policies that actually get the economy moving, robust economic growth, so that people who are in minimum wage jobs can move out of those into higher wage jobs. You know, it's ironic that many of the same people who support raising the minimum wage, which would eliminate up to 1 million minimum wage jobs in this country and hurt the people that they say they're trying to help, but they're the same people who support policies that have eliminated over 8,000 jobs in our Kentucky coal fields, which pay $70,000 a year or $80,000 a year. Or they're the same people who support Obamacare, which is forcing employers to cut hours in half. So really, we need to focus on policies that are actually going to get people out of minimum wage jobs, through a growing economy.
Paycheck equality. Your opponent, your Democratic opponent, Elizabeth Jensen, says that she is for a law that would require equal pay for men and women doing the same job. A federal law.
I'm a father of 2 daughters, and Carol and I are raising our daughters to believe that the sky is the limit. If you work hard and play by the rules, gender should not matter at all. And so, of course, I believe in equal pay for equal work. And, in fact, I don't just talk about it. I've done it. The top people in my office are females. My chief of staff is a female. My district director is a female. My communications director is a female. My scheduler is a female. I believe in taking advantage of the talents and the skills of women. But you know what? The interesting thing is there are already 2 laws on the books, the 1963 Equal Pay Act and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, the 1964 law. If there is gender discrimination in the workplace, people can sue for that. People can achieve recovery for that, and that's right. When gender discrimination, it has no place in the workforce. But another law on top of that imposes paperwork burdens on employers, that lines the pocket of trial lawyers, and actually decreases flexibility of employees to give merit-based bonuses to women, actually has the reverse effect of hurting compensation for women in the workplace.
So if you say that there is a woman with that complaint, then she's to go to file a civil suit?
There's 2 existing laws on the books that prohibit discrimination on the basis of gender in the workplace. And there are still cases, unfortunately, of gender discrimination, but those laws are there to protect women who are the victims of gender discrimination. And there's other reasons for the wage gap. The other reasons for the wage gap that have nothing to do with discrimination. Some of it is choice, some of it is length of hours worked, some of it is decisions by women to both work and have a family and child rearing. But the bottom line is, I believe in equal pay for equal work. I'm raising my daughters to believe in that. I practice it myself, but we don't need another law that duplicates existing law but imposes additional burdens on employers that will actually hurt the opportunity for women to get merit-based raises.
All right, Congressman Andy Barr is with us. We'll talk about the Affordable Care Act and his opposition to that and how he thinks that is hurting the economy and more on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. Before we go,
like sardines in there.
Don't they know drive time can help?
Go get them.
Hi, this is where you get off.
Let's get you some wheels.
Oh, I can't afford
With Drive Time's new low price lease, you can't afford
not to get a car. What? I can't believe you said that. It's like you live in here.
Really good.
Save yourself. Everybody drives with a cancel anytime lease. Only at Drive Time. Call, click, or visit.
WKYT-TV, an equal opportunity employer, is dedicated to providing broad outreach regarding job vacancies at the station. Vacancies at WKYT can be in production, news reporting and videography, sales, and engineering. Organizations that wish to receive our vacancy information should send their request to WKYT-TV, P.O. Box 55037, Lexington, Kentucky 40555, or email your request to eeo@wkyt.com.
welcome back. WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers on the air with Congressman Andy Barr, who's running for re-election in the November 4th election. And we had his opponent, Elizabeth Jensen, Democratic nominee, with us a couple of weeks ago. Congressman, you've repeatedly voted to repeal the Affordable Care Act. You promise to continue that effort. We've noticed something in polling in Kentucky. When you call it Affordable Care Act, also known as Kentucky Connect, it polls one way. And when you call it with a state health care exchange, and when you call it Obamacare, it polls significantly worse when the president's name is put into it. In any case, do you still support repeal of the entire Health Care Act?
Yes, we need health care reform in this country, but we need health care reform that's actually going to work for working Americans and going to help lower the cost of health care without compromising the quality of health care. So whatever you call it, whether you call it Obamacare or Kentucky Connect, here's what we know. We know that 280,000 Kentuckians have lost health insurance that they liked. Their plans have been canceled. We know that premium renewals, especially in the individual and small group market, are going up. Why do I know this? Because I get inundated with calls from constituents concerned about premiums doubling in many cases for themselves and their small businesses. We know that choices are being taken away. A young mother with a daughter with a heart defect called our office and said that she had a specialist at Cincinnati Children's Hospital and in Texas, and she lost those doctors because of being forced into Kentucky Connect, into Obamacare. So, look, we need more coverage. We need to deal with the pre-existing condition question. We need to deal with healthcare inflation. But this is not the answer. And so I've worked in a bipartisan way. I've introduced a bill myself with a Democrat from California that would actually lower the cost of health care, called the Saving Lives, Saving Costs Act. It would reduce defensive medicine, it would prevent junk lawsuits, and it would actually improve the quality of care. That's why we call it Saving Lives, because it would increase the quality of care delivered. It's been well received, and like I said, it is bipartisan. And then I'm a co-sponsor of a bill that is a true replacement to Obamacare that would actually fix the problems and lower costs, and it's called the American Healthcare Reform Act. This is the true patient-centered reform that would lower costs, would not grow the government, would not put bureaucrats in between patients and families and doctors, and it would restore that patient-doctor relationship.
Your opponent has been very critical of your use of franking privileges, and you have spent more than any other member of Congress from Kentucky sending out mailings at taxpayer expense. You've said that you were determined to communicate with your constituents. Is there a line in somewhere there about the content of those letters that goes out that crosses between informational and promotional?
Well, first of all, we're doing exactly what the people of this district asked me to do, which is communicate more, but also be fiscally responsible. And we have been. We've spent $300,000 less in personnel and administrative overhead than my predecessor. We've spent $20,000 less in rent than my predecessor. We returned $50,000 to the taxpayers last year, but we've communicated more, which is exactly what the people of the 6th District asked for. We're not spending more than other members of Congress. We're just allocating how we spend our resources in a way that our constituents want, which is more surveys, more communication, more town hall meetings, more teletown hall meetings, more coalition meetings that we do for agriculture and for the energy sector and for our veterans. So we're doing what the people have asked us to do. And in terms of the allegation that these are campaign-style mailings, these mailings, every one of them, is approved by a bipartisan commission in Washington that certifies that they are not campaign style, that they are in fact consistent with the law relating to the frank privilege. So, look, we're doing what we were elected to do, and we will never ever apologize for communicating with our constituents, and we will never apologize for our record on fiscal responsibility. I voted twice for a balanced budget. I've co-sponsored a balanced budget amendment, and I've introduced legislation that would actually get our deficits and debt under control.
Just a few seconds left. Would you adjust the content of those mailings if you had it to do over?
No, the content of the mailings were approved by a bipartisan commission. What we're doing is we're giving our constituents information about the services that they can access through our office. Overwhelming positive feedback from our constituents. They like the communication. They want more of it, not less.
Congressman Andy Barr, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
And we'll be following the election right up to Election Day and Election Night. And thank you for joining us for this edition of Kentucky Newsmakers. We'll see you bright and early this week on WKYT This Morning, and we certainly hope you make it a good week ahead.